Come on. Shabbos mezuzah. Come on, maybe
Welcome aboard B'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Yegin Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yaakov's Mitzvah on the mezuzah and Hilchos Shabbos. That's the great sister sponsoring a shir called Yegin Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com.
This week I learned a new shot in the word Emar Ma'at Vasei Harbe. I started with a simple shaila a few weeks ago, and it developed into literally an entire shir. Here's the Ma'aseh Shahaya. Someone asked me Erev Shabbos. He has a warehouse out of state, like a two hour drive from here. And Bekitzi has these security cameras, and occasionally he checks what's doing in his warehouse. And it was like Friday afternoon. He saw that the workers were moving boxes, and by mistake, with the box, they hit the mezuzah and knocked the mezuzah off onto the floor. And he's watching it. Mamish is live or whatever. It just happened. I'm not sure. I think it was just Mamish live. And of course, when they did that, one said some nice curse words. Oh no! And the other said, no problem. Let's put it back. No, oh no. So here it was, his mezuzah in his warehouse that was knocked on the floor and put on by a goy. Is now the mezuzah puzzle? A guy put up a mezuzah. Does he have to go back today and reattach it? Could he wait till after Shabbos? Is it kosher as it is? And it's interesting that this is common shaila, and we'll soon see it's negay when they have a painter or a worker that takes off and puts back the mezuzah. And yet it's not on Shulchan Aruch if a guy that attached the mezuzah, is it kosher or not? Then we had a similar shaila, maybe a little slightly different, but that was the end of Emar Ma'at Vasei Harbe, where on Shabbos a mezuzah fell off. Either it fell off, the tape dried, or in this case the children were playing, they threw a ball, the ball hit the mezuzah. The kids said the mezuzah on the floor. So the shaila was, first of all, can they pick up a mezuzah? Is the mezuzah muktza? Is there a special hat because of bezoyin? If, let's say, the case is still on, can they slip the mezuzah in on Shabbos without actually knocking a nail? Slipping a mezuzah into the case, and if you can't do that, can have a guy or a child put back the mezuzah? Do you make a bracha? So bekitza, it's Emar Ma'at Vasei Harbe. Literally, the question of a guy putting up a mezuzah. Can a cotton put up mezuzah? Is there a problem of boneh on Shabbos? Another interesting question was, this room did not have a mezuzah at that point. The question is there an issur to use the room? Or, if you don't have a mitzvah, you don't have a mitzvah. Is there an issur on a room to be used if there's no mezuzah attached to that door? So I want to be meisver though before we start that we're talking about Shabbos, but the entire shir is negeh to Yom Tov as well. Because the sugya of today, muktza or boneh or the like, is lav dafka Shabbos. Some halachas there are Yom Tov more kal. This is no different Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we actually have 12 more days that this shir is relevant. So let's go in order. We'll start with the most important question to start. And that is there an issur to live in the room without a mezuzah? In other words, if you hold there's no issur, so then continue living. Put it up when at your convenience. Or maybe there's an issur to live in a room without a mezuzah. So one thing is clear. All agree, put it up ASAP, as soon as possible. Because forget about if there's an issur or not, but this is clear in the Paiskim that every moment the mezuzah is on the door, you mekayim a mitzvah. In other words, unlike Ner Chanukah, that adlaka is a mitzvah, it's one ma'aseh mitzvah, and then it's over. I mean, it's burning, but that's the one mitzvah. Mezuzah, every moment it's on the doorpost, there's a different mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah of kfiyas ha-mezuzah and then it's all over. It's the existence of the mezuzah. So, chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs, why should you not capitalize and put it up as soon as possible? So that's all agree. Chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs, forget about if there's an issur or not. Put up the mezuzah as soon as you can to be zoich in the mitzvah of mezuzah every moment. And this is enough reason to never delay putting up a mezuzah. Derech HaShulchan in Reish Pei Sif Pei, and I quote, if a person realizes he has no mezuzah on his door, Asaloi lahashais afilu rega, don't delay even a moment. Yelech l'soifel liklis mezuzah ulekoivoi miyad. That is rule number one. Don't delay putting up or having a mezuzah on your doorpost. People sometimes give in the mezuzah to check, which is a chiyuv twice in 7 years. So it's kedai not to just bring it to the soifa and he'll call you when he finishes. It might be a very busy day. You can't do it that day. Call him in advance. Say, I would like to have same day service. Can you do it today? I'll pick it up today. If not, I'll wait till tomorrow. But don't miss the mitzvah of mezuzah that's so precious. So rule number one is don't delay in putting up the mezuzah. But the question is there an issur to be in a room without a mezuzah? Like in that case, the mezuzah was knocked off the study. So maybe they shouldn't go into the study the whole Shabbos. The case of the warehouse. Yeah, he's not going there, but his stuff are being kept in that warehouse. So the truth is that this question, believe it or not, as fundamental as it is not mefurish in Gemara Shulchan Aruch. So let's think about other mitzvahs. I'll give you an example. There's a mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, Ner issur beisai, it's a chayvas hadar, a mitzvah very much related to the house. But no one had a havamina to say that if someone Chalil didn't light Ner Chanukah one night, he can't live in the house. What does Chanukah have to do with the house? Right? There's a mitzvah and there's a house. So why should I think if you don't have a mezuzah you can't use the house? You're mevatel and aseh. But why is there an issur on the house? I'll give you a better analogy. There's a mitzvah deraisa, actually the Shulchan Aruch, the Chayshim Mishpah, Tav Chav Zayin, Aleph and Gimel says there's a mitzvah aseh to make a makkah, protect the fence on your roof, and there's also a lav to have a roof without a makkah. So there's a lav and aseh, but says the Chazon Ish in Maasros Siman Yotes, and I saw Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky in a sefer on Hilchos Maika quotes it and adds a raya to that from a Yad Ramah, that if a person has a roof and he didn't put up a makkah, even though he's mevatel mitzvah and oiva lo yisaseh, but there's no issur to go on that roof. If the roof is not treif without a makkah, I mean you have to be careful, it's dangerous. But there's no issur to go on a roof without a makkah. There's a bit laseh and a loiseh, but there's no issur. So if there's no issur to go on a dangerous roof, why should there be an issur to use a room without a mezuzah? But then again, we know certain mitzvahs, besides the mitzvah, there's an issur. At least we seem to think that if I have dalet kanfois and I have no tzitzis, there's an issur to wear that. Or better yet, there's a mitzvah deraisa to toivel a keli. But if I don't toivel the keli, there's an issur d'rabbanan to use the keli shiloi tovel. Maybe the same is true regarding a room without a mezuzah. How about eating out of the sukkah? There's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. Is there an issur to eat out of the sukkah or is it just bit laseh? So that's a big discussion in the Paiskim. But the point is we see there are different types of mitzvahs. By some there's a mitzvah that doesn't make an issur. Tfilas Keilah makes an issur. So let's see if we can find Rishayim to discuss this. The Mordechai in Hilchos Tzitzis, Siman Tov Saf Kuf Mem Dalid, discusses tzitzis. And he says a chiddush that we might find surprising. There's no issur per se to wear dalid kanfos without tzitzis. And I quote, the Torah doesn't say lo silbaish beged sheyesh lo dalid kanfos, but the Torah says on dalid kanfos put on tzitzis. But there's no issur per se of wearing dalid kanfos without tzitzis. And then he says, Varaya, mezuzah and maika, otu b'loi mezuzah also likoneis bebayis. Is there any issur to go into a room without a mezuzah? El ba'moid v'asei koi v'sulai. The person that has a study without a mezuzah is being mevatel a mitzvah. Terrible thing. He's losing a mitzvah. Terrible thing. But there's no issur. The room is not treif. Just like Dalet Kanfais is not treif. And there's a second Rishon that says the same analogy. Marach Or Zeru and Siman Samach Aleph, also talking about Dalet Kanfais, a beggar of four corners. He says, but tzitzis is like makkah and mezuzah, that we don't find that there's an issur to go in that room. And the Magen Avram, in Siman Yud Gimel Sivkot and Ches, and Siman Yud Tes Sivkot and Aleph, twice seems to say just that a mezuzah that's not put up on a room, so it's a bit laseh, a terrible thing, but there's no issur to use that room. But what's noteworthy, we do seem to feel that there's an issur to put on Dalet Kanfais without tzitzis, because midrabanan there is definitely an issur. And that all the poskim say. If you remember the halacha, if someone realizes tzitzis were pasul on Shabbos, and he's b'reshus harabim, he's allowed to wear them until he gets home because of k'fayid habriyas. If there's an issur deraisa, you have to take off the tzitzis even in the street. So the poskim say it's only an issur derabanan to wear Dalet Kanfais without tzitzis. And since on Shabbos you can't make tzitzis, you're allowed to wear it. So the obvious implication is, during the week, there's an issur derabanan to wear Dalet Kanfais without tzitzis. But who said that applies to mezuzah? In fact, the Tziv in Eimek David, the Varm Chav Beis Ches, he has an interesting diak. When the Torah says put up a mezuzah on the house, in other words, the house is okay, there's a mitzvah to put on mezuzah. But regarding tzitzis, asher techase boy, you didn't put it on yet. Put on mezuzah, put on tzitzis right away, because there's an issur, at least midrabanan, to wear Dalet Kanfais without tzitzis. So we definitely see a makar that even that there is no issur to be in a room without a mezuzah. However, the Pri Megadim in Siman Lamed Ches, Eish Lavram Tezvav, based on a Yerushalmi, he says there's an issur to go into a room without a mezuzah unless you have no other choice. L'mashal, people lived in one-room homes and the mezuzah fell off. So where's he going to go? Become homeless? So the Pri Megadim's lashon is, if you have no other dira, you're allowed to stay in the house. So the Pischei Tshuva in Yeridei, beginning of Siman Reish Pei, and other poskim say is mashma that if you have a different room, don't use the room without a mezuzah. The Chayvas Hadar, Baron Kabloi's classic seif Hilchos Mezuzah Perek Aleph Sif Hey, says also, if you have a different home to relocate, don't use the home that has no mezuzah. But it makes an interesting chiluk, which I saw the Steichemer also says that. The issur this issur of going into a room without a mezuzah is only on the balabas. You didn't put up mezuzah, don't use the room. An outsider could go into the room without a mezuzah. Obviously, he's not mechuyev mezuzah. And even me, when I rent an apartment in the Chutz La'aretz, mitzad adin, the first 30 days I'm part of a mezuzah. You have to live there. So how could a visitor be worse than the owner? The first 30 days is part of a mezuzah. So the Chayvas Hadar, as the Steichemet both say, even if there's an issur to go into a room, it's only on the balabas. The Kajiklav in Eretz Tzvi Chelik Aleph Siman Tzadik, he entertains a thought that even an outsider can't go into a room without a mezuzah. Now he doesn't speak this out, but I think it's pashut. How could that be? If the person living there, the soicha is part of 30 days, so how could a visitor for 2 hours be worse? Teres Char is pashut. Because if there's a balabas that has a chiyuv mezuzah, he bought the house, or it's renting beyond 30 days, so since there's a chiyuv on the bayis, no one could use that bayis maybe. But first 30 days, there's no chiyuv at all. So we do see even a havamina that even an outsider can't use the room. But definitely the Pri Megadim seems to feel that the balabas of a house that has no mezuzah should not use the house if there's a different alternative. The Tzitz Eliezer and Chelik Yud Gimel Siman and Gimel gives clarity, and he says that it's not a real issur d'Rabbanan mamish, because the Pri Megadim says if you have no house, you're allowed to live there. What kind of issur is that? Teretz is it's a precaution. Don't delay. Don't use the house if you have a different alternative. So I think we could say regarding our first question, is there an issur mamish to live in a house without a mezuzah? It doesn't seem so. Some places say beferish there's no issur. Even the Pri Megadim makes it conditional. If you have no other place to go, you could stay there. And the truth is, the fact that la halacha, an outsider could use the room without a mezuzah, is an indication that it's not a tray for room. Otherwise, why difference between balabas and visitor? So the fact that the balabas could use the room if he has no other choice, and an outsider could use the room, is there enough of a raya that it's not an issur d'Rabbanan to use the room? Now, of course, as we said, chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs, as soon as possible, put up the mezuzah. But if someone has a room that he has no mezuzah, la halacha, he would be allowed to use that room. That leads us to the next question. Now that we see that ASAP, put up the mezuzah as soon as possible, let's go to our Shabbos dilemma. The mezuzah fell off, was knocked off. Bekitza, there's a room without a mezuzah. You don't want to live without a mezuzah. Mutahi muter. I want the mitzvah mezuzah. Is it an option to call a guy to reattach the mezuzah? Now, of course, if the guy takes nails and knocks in a case, so it's a malacha deraisa, as we'll soon see. A guy can't do a malacha deraisa for a yid. Let's assume the guy will do only an issur d'Rabbanan. We'll soon see the details. But the guy is doing an issur d'Rabbanan only. So now, b'makom mitzvah, maybe we'll say, shvus t'shvus b'makom mitzvah. Or maybe we'll say, what kind of mitzvah is that? A guy should put up a mezuzah, oich me'ah mitzvah. He's not a yid, puts on tefillin for you. Why is mezuzah better? The question is there any value if a guy puts up a mezuzah? Like that story in the warehouse. The guy knocked it down and put it up. Or the most famous story about this painter, a Goyish painter, he took off the mezuzah and he told the balabas, don't worry, Rabbi, I have experience, I'm a painter for Jews many years. I took off the mezuzah and I put it back. I didn't have to read the directions. I just threw out that whole directions and I put up the case. He didn't read directions because he didn't look inside. That was the mezuzah. But that's what the Goyim do. But let's say he did it right. He read the directions, the instructions, and he put it back. But Lamaise, are you yaitzu with that? So again, and it's a double pliya because this question is also fundamental to Hilchos mezuzah, and it's not mefurish in Shulchan Aruch. But for Shas Yidin, you have a pretty good start. Let's think of other mitzvahs where the question is, can a guy do it or not, is found in a Gemara. So what comes to mind probably first is the Gemara in Shabbos, Chav Gimel. A guy that lights Ner Chanukah for the Yid's not Yaitza. Because since we paskin Hadlaka is a mitzvah, Hadik Ner Shal Chanukah is the Nusach HaBracha, a guy's Hadlaka is not an Hadlaka. So we see regarding Ner Chanukah, the guy's participation is meaningless. Regarding a guy that wrote stamps for Torah Tefillah Mezuzah, that's a Mechaba in Yeridei Reish Pei Aleph. It's a Gemara that if you have no mitzvah putting on tefillin, you can't write tefillin. So a guy that wrote it, even if it's a beautiful ksav, you put it in sheimos, should say it in Shulchan Aruch. But there are some mitzvahs that a guy could do, and I'll tell you ma'aseh shehaya. Someone told me he was recently in one of these outdoor mikvahs that one of the big supermarkets have, and there were a bunch of goyim lined up, and they were toveling kalim one after the other. And he was infuriated. Goyim are toveling kalim, so he asked them, well, who do you work for? So he told them a big company, a big food company, and he was incensed. We trust the hechsher, they have goyim toveling kalim, what's going on here? So he asked the Yid, do you see what's going on? He goes, I'm watching, don't worry, they're okay. He goes, oh, really? And he came to me, how could you use this food? So I would say, lo ya'amor, it's kanoi. It's a Ferish Mechaba in Yeridei Kuf Chaf Sif Tezvav that if a guy toivel the keli, it helps. The only problem is he's not nemon that he did it right because why should he do all of them? He does part of them, mixes kakulei. He looks for excuses. He doesn't entirely in. But if God lo'imid al gaba, if a yid is watching, then it's kosher. The only issue is you lose the bracha. So I'm sure that yid, if he was the God lo'imid al gaba, he made the bracha and he toiveled some of them. But, before we get quick to criticize, we have to learn halacha. But we see that mitzad adin, the only problem is bracha, but the tefillah is perfectly valid. And I'll give you another example where a guy's mitzvah, ma'isa mitzvah, works. Unfortunately, this is kedai to mention because it comes up more than it should. Sometimes an isha is delayed on Erev Shabbos, and Bekitza, it's after Shkia, and she didn't like Ner Shabbos, which is for the woman is, not just intimidating, it's devastating, because if you didn't like Ner, chas v'sholem, there's a knas, terrible. So the halacha is, you're allowed to call a goy, if it's still bein hashmashos, to light the Neris instead of the woman. How does a goy light Ner Shabbos for a Yid? But that's a shvus to shvus. Shvus, one shvus, a mila akum. Lighting is a deraisa, but since it's bein hashmashos, chazal mekel, any amir la'akim is mutter bein hashmashos. And this is a makkah mitzvah because the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. How could a goy light Ner Shabbos for a woman? And the kash is bigger. There is one shita that the isha can make a bracha on the goyish hadlaka. How could that be? So teretz is that the mitzvah hadlakas Ner Shabbos is to have Ner that gives kavod Shabbos, oynik Shabbos, and shalom bayis. Who cares who did it? Now we paskin, you don't make a bracha. That's the way they paskin paskin. But no doubt about it that the goy is allowed to light and the ish is yaitza. The bracha the hadik ner shel Shabbos. Why is different than Chanukah? That's a different shmuz. But la locha la maisa, if it's still bein hashmashos, the guy could do halakas neiris, because there are some mitzvahs that it's not the maisa mitzvah alone. It's teitzah. It's the result. And if you have the ner Shabbos, you have the shalom bayis, kavod Shabbos, and onik Shabbos, you're okay. If a guy did milah, so you look in Shulchan Aruch, you're there, Reish Samach Daled, the Mechaber seems to hold it's okay. The Ramah says you have to make a tafas dan bris, and the Shach says even the Mechaber you have to make a tafas dan bris. But there's a tzad that a goy shemila works. A goy that builds a sukkah, we know gan vach is kosher if he did it l'shem tzeil. Okay, that's not a raya because that's not a mitzvah. That's a hechshem mitzvah. But there are some mitzvahs that a goy has very much shaychus to. The mitzvah of makkah. So we're not, most of us don't have the ability to build a makkah. You call a worker. So Baba call a Yiddish worker for two reasons. Giving it business and let him do a makkah kalacha. But if a guy does a makkah, the Yid's yaitza. In fact, the Machna Ephraim in Hilchos Shluchim Yud Aleph says it's so much of a good makkah that the guy could build a makkah and the Yid can make a bracha on that. Now, most places can question that. If he doesn't do anything, how do you make a bracha? But no doubt about it, a guy that makes a makkah for the Yid is a ma'isa mitzvah. Because that's the same point that if the mitzvah is the outcome, the result, so then who cares who did it? So we have makkah for sure, we have ner Shabbos, we have tfilas kelim, that a goyish action counts. But then again we have ner Chanukah doesn't count, Mila doesn't count, halacha l'maisa. So the big question from me to you is, what's the halacha regarding mezuzah? The question about that worker that in the warehouse, or the painter that took it off. And I know people have this question from time to time. And Re'ez Epel, I'm not sure why, but this question also is not mefurish. We mentioned probably more than a half a dozen Gemaras that speak about other mitzvahs, not a word about mezuzah. So we might suggest that the ik of the mezuzah is a shmira. So if the guy puts up a smoke alarm, so it's a good protection. The guy puts up a mezuzah, why isn't it good? The heilige mezuzah is on my wall. But that's a very poor analogy, because the mezuzah works because it's a ma'isa mitzvah. If it's laying in your drawer, the mezuzah doesn't work. If the goyish kviyas doesn't count, so it's not on your wall. I mean, it's there, but it's not functional. It wasn't activated. In Svara, it makes sense that you need a ma'isa mitzvah. And Takadi, Stei Chemed, Imareches Mem, Ois Kuf Laman Aleph, quoting a Chikrei Leiv, his first, his psak at first was that just like Ner Chanukah doesn't work because you need a ma'isa adlaka, when it comes to mezuzah, the bracha is the kvoya mezuzah. You need a ma'isa kviyas. A goyis kviyas doesn't count. So therefore, pashtus should not help. Ikke mitzvah, the kviyos. And kviyos akum command lesser. So therefore, says the chikhalei, you have to take it off and put it back again by a yisrael. The second time is up to chikhalei. There's a hekesh kshartem uksaftam. You can't just write tefillin unless you have a mitzvah of tefillin. A guy has no mitzvah mezuzah, how could he put up mezuzah? And what's noteworthy, he says, but adav tzarich talmud, I don't know. I didn't discover America. I didn't think why isn't anybody talking about this? And this is also the opinion of other poskim. The more of a holis that he quotes, that he says chalila loima, that by maku you make a brach on it. He argues vehemently with the Machna Ephraim. He writes, many are loichim with that psak. If a guy does a makkah, you can make a brach on that. And therefore he says, if a guy put up a mezuzah, that's not a ma'aseh mitzvah. And he has a very interesting raya. Anybody ever had a question in their family of a pidyon haben that the 31st day when the pidyon is supposed to be falls on Shabbos? So you can't do it on Shabbos, you postpone it. The question is, Matzoi Shabbos or Sunday? The question is, why don't you have a guy make the pidyon? If it helps Aidiakum. Teretz, if you don't have the mitzvah, you can't do it. And this is the opinion of the Das Kedoshim, the B'Chacharov, and the Dulei HaKodesh. That's all on Reish Peites. The Tila LeDavid, the thin Chelik, the second volume, there, Siman Kuf Tes. He says you have to have Lishma, you have to have a Ma'aseh Mitzvah, and a guy has no shaykhis to any of this. A guy that put up a mezuzah, you're not yotzim. But, and here's the big but, why isn't this a Gemara on Shulchan Aruch? We find regarding Sefer Torah, Ner Chanukah, and then you have a Marshag. Now the Marshag, this is an atypical tshuva of the Marshag. Marshag was a guy in Olam with very bright, gesunte plates who paskind everything with Shas and Poiskin. He doesn't have a whole tshuva about the Shaila. In Yeridei Siman Nun Zayin, at the end of a tshuva, that's something else, Ani Mestapik, if a guy was Kivei mezuzah, is it good? Then he first thinks, maybe it's like tzitzis, tasleim and osoi, but it says not true, because a guy that makes a sukkah, the sukkah is kasha, im kei mashma, the mezuzah should cover akum k'sheira. No gemaras, because there are no gemaras. But he says if it's not found any place in Shas that it's possible, it must be kosher. The Torah Lishma, that's the Ben Ish Chai say, Tshuva Sefer in Siman Shin Zayin, is also mekel. And again, it's not a tremendous chiddush to us because we do have mitzvah that a guy could do. Ner Chanukah, Ner Shabbos, a guy does it. Tfilas Kalim, a guy does it. Okay, you have to make sure the guy put it up properly. But if you know it's there and you see it's good, what could be the problem? I saw a new sefer, me was new Yakapanim, Ogo Balecha, it's Amud Kufla Amud Vav, where he says the same, and he brings two Rishonim that he found, the Reim and the issur, that mezuzah, that even though a guy can't write it, a guy is allowed to put it up. And he refutes all the reason to say a guy can't put up mezuzah. There's no din of tasleim and osli in this context. He says that the mitzvah is being, not the kviyus, and you don't need a lishma on the kviyus. And he says that kshartim uksaftim is only you got to be writing, not you got to be putting up. B'kitzur, he is very convinced that a guy could put up a mezuzah. The only issue, which no one could deny, is that if a guy puts it up, the yid loses the bracha. And we spoke not so long ago that we should have a guy toivel for us, because if the guy toivel is for us, l'mashal on Shabbos, you lose the bracha. Don't do a mitzvah without a bracha. So if a guy puts it up, you lost the bracha. But in our case, the person's warehouse, the guy knocked down and put it up, so it's up. Does he have to run back today, or Sunday, or Monday? No. Especially Erev Shabbos, don't run back, it's fine the way it is. So Lamaisa, it's interesting, something as fundamental as this, we could say it's Gedolei Achronim, but not earlier. So we must say that this question, I rather leave it as I said, there are many that are mekel. The svara is, it's just being there, but most poskim seem to be machmer that it's not a good kviyas. Now, besides that, as we said, every moment that a mezuzah is up, you have a mitzvah. So why keep the mezuzah up that a guy put, which is questionable? Avada take it down and put it back. Now, if the guy put it back properly, and you take it off just to put it back, I would make another bracha because maybe the way the guy did it was good. But no doubt about it, if the case at a warehouse, he told me it was Friday afternoon. It was a probably 1.5 hour drive each way. So to risk Erev Shabbos, forget it. Go back as soon as possible. I mean, as soon as reasonably possible. But Lamaisa, if he would say, but I'm convinced the Marshag is right, that it's good. Okay. There are other places who also say that. But basically, we could tell him 2 svaras lahakol, at least until he gets back to the warehouse. Number 1, maybe the guy's kviyas is good. And number 2, in the worst scenario, even if the guy's kviyas wasn't good, but there's no issur to have a room without a mezuzah. So let the room be without a mezuzah. There's no issur in what he's doing, keeping his stuff in his warehouse. But again, we are chachmei leiv, yikach mitzvahs, go ASAP to go and put up the mezuzah to be yoytzel chaladeis. Now, the big question now is, let's say it's a typical case at home. The mezuzah, either the tape dried and the mezuzah fell on the floor, or a child knocked it down. The many different situations. Lamaisa, the mezuzah's off the wall. How are you allowed to pick it up and put it back? So we're going to try to go in order. As we said, to ask a guy doesn't seem to be proper, because some say you're not even yaitza. So what are you gaining? So to tell him to malacha deraisa for a no mitzvah doesn't seem to be a profitable investment. Now, if someone says kimli that the guy is perfectly lechatchila and I want to have a mezuzah, okay, but it's not lechatchila for sure. Now, what's interesting is that the Rav Vosna has 2 tshuvas, Beis Kuf Nun Ches and Dal Kuf Mem Gimel, and he says emphatically to ask a guy to do it is not an eitzah. Because l'shitasai, the guy that puts up mezuzah, you're not yotzah. So you're only losing Hilchos Shabbos and not gaining. The Das Kedoshim, the Mishmat also say this, to have a guy put it up and it's not even kosher, so what are you gaining? Now, you'll say, I'll ask a child on the bar mitzvah. So my first question is it a Jewish child? So why are you asking a Jewish child? Do malacha. You're not allowed to do that. Even lo yigil lechinuch, you don't give biyodayim a cotton to do an issur. And if it's your child, you're talking about a pasuk in the Torah. Bincha uvitecha. The child is lo yigil lechinuch, but lahavdil, your behem is also lo yigil lechinuch. So what's the issur behemtecha? Because it's for you, a child also. So a cotton is usually not an option, and in this case certainly not. But besides all the Hilchos Shabbos issues involved with the cotton, if you assume, which most places can seem to, that a guy can't put up a mezuzah, cotton also, it's cheresh shayt of a cotton, that's typically in one group. So our question that for some reason not mefurish in Shulchan Aruch, if we assume a guy can't put it up, a cotton is not better. So basically, we see that the cotton is not an option, as the guy is not an option. Probably a cotton is worse on Shabbos because of Hilchos Shabbos. So now the question is there any way that I, as a gadol, a yid, could put it back? So let's go in order. The first question that someone asked me was, a good question, is a mezuzah muktza. Now it might sound strange, mezuzah muktza, what's wrong with a mezuzah? But the truth is it's a wonderful mitzvah, but why isn't it muktza? I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a shayla, a mezuzah, this is mamash ma'aseh shehoyah. Someone's going to the mountains after Shabbos, before the summer, and he bought a few mezuzahs, he left in his bedroom. So, in a bedroom, a mezuzah doesn't belong there at night. Shabbos, Friday night it was. So he wanted to pick up the mezuzahs and take it out of the room. Are those mezuzahs muktza? Now, why should they be muktza? I'll tell you. You don't eat it, you don't use it, it's not functional. You put it onto the wall. Putting it onto the wall is an issur on Shabbos. So basically, it's not a functional keli, it's not food, it's not a sefer. Plus, a mezuzah might even qualify to be a chsar and kiss. You don't use a lot of pitz luchisai. Mezuzah mitzvah, so is sakin shomila, so is sakin shashchita. But more so, if it fell off on Shabbos, like our case, Bein hashmasha is the entire bein hashmasha is attached to the wall. Why don't we say migas ksay bein hashmasha is ksay lekula yayma? So it's pretty reasonable that a mezuzah might be muktza. Even a mezuzah that wasn't on the wall, like I told you, it was laying in his bedroom. But lemaisa, it's not a functional keli. And the Mincha Shabbos in Peiches Lamed Ches has this very shaila. And he basically says that even though you could look in it and you could read the words, but obviously it's not oimid to read words. And l'chayra, it's oimid to attach to your doorpost, which is an issur on Shabbos. So it's basically not a functional keli. Then he adds that maybe it's like a get. And a get, according to some shittas, Grady quotes the Magen Avraham, most shittas are mekel grada, but he quotes the sheet that a get is muktza. If a get is muktza, a mezuzah is muktza. And then his third reason is really convincing. That since we are makbid not to use the mezuzah for anything but its intended usage, it might qualify to be a chesar and kiss. Chesar and kiss doesn't have to be $1 million value. It's something that you set aside that you don't use it. No, you don't use a mezuzah to stuff a bottle. So therefore he says, if you hold that the mezuzah is like a klisha malachtal issur because you attach it, so to move it out of the bedroom, you could say it's maybe a sarach mekaymai, because I can't use the room as it is. So that's a form of mekaymai. But if this mezuzah is chesar and kiss, then even sarach mekaymai you can't move it. And the Oz Nidbru in Chelik Ches Lamed Ches says the same thing, and he says, Bishleima Megillah, even if it's not, you don't lay Megillah on Shabbos, but it's functional, you could practice, you could read it, but a mezuzah, what use do you have out of it? So he says, even with Mekaymai, a mezuzah is muktza. Now the truth is, that's not so hard to explain. It's a non-functional, valuable keli. But there's one catch, and that is there's a Mechaben Shin Ches Siv Dalid. Mechaber says halacha, which is a chiddush, but a klish malach laheta, a hat. We're allowed to move it. Even micham l'tzel shouldn't get ruined. But shaloi l'tzayir klal, you shouldn't move even a klish malach laheta. There's food, kisvei hakodesh, you're allowed to move unrestricted, even shaloi l'tzayir klal. But other kelim, even the heta, only move with l'tzayir. The famous question when someone's sitting by Yesheva Brachas, and the speeches are going on, and he's all speeched out. So he gets nervous, he picks up the silverware and starts to play with it. So that might be Shalei Tzarech Klal, or maybe that's to let out all the steam. So it's Tzarech, his nerve. You're probably right. But this Shalei Tzarech Klal is a problem. But Zok the Shulchan Aruch, but Kisvei HaKodesh and Oichlin, even Shalei Tzarech Klal is mutter. Why? Because there's a special heta or kula for Kisvei HaKodesh. The Ramah then discusses tefillin, which is a whole shmooze for itself. Is it a malachta l'issur, l'heta? I'm not going to get into that now. But the question is, which the Tosfos Shabbos, one of the earlier achrayim, asked on this is, why don't we say that tefillin are chesar and kiss? You say it's malachta l'issur, you have to move it tzarech m'gufa. In other words, tzarech m'kayim, l'mashal. A person comes to his table on Shabbos and there's someone's left his tefillin there. So even though it's malachta l'issur, you have to pick it up and move it tzarech m'kayim. So frag the Tosfos Shabbos, why? Why isn't tefillin chesar and kiss? You don't think children, hit each other with tefillin. You use it for the mitzvah, that's it. So he says a guy in the Shavuot that the klal is kisvei hakodesh. There's less muktza than any other muktza. Mechaber says Shalei Tzarech Klal is mutter. It goes a notch down. So any kisvei hakodesh is immune, is exempt from the muktza of chesar and kiss. As I state in Tosfos Shabbos. The Mikdanos Eliyahu Chelik Beis and Samach, a beautiful, thorough tshuva that tefillin, even if they're yikrei erech, are not chesar and kiss. Now here's the catch. Rav Vozna and Chelik Daled Kuf Mem Gimel and Yud Aleph Pei Hey. L'dei pshita that a mezuzah is not a chesar and kiss. Now he doesn't spell it out, but this mechaber that wrote the Sefer Agav Alecha said he heard from Rav Vozna Mipek Kotchay that his reason was based on the Tosfos Shabbos. That kisvei hakodesh are never chesar and kiss. They're always a notch less of an issur. So therefore, mezuzah is not a chesar and kiss, even if it really is. Rabbi Yashiv in the Shalma Yehuda Aleph Yud Beis, he says even attached to the wall, the mezuzah is a keli, and it's kisvei hakodesh. It seems that it's just exempt from the muktza machzor and kiss. And the Oznidbru, although he was machmetaka like the Mincha Shabbos, but he said, what should I tell you? The Mincha Shabbos, the Tosfos Shabbos says there's no chesar and kiss by a mezuzah. So we have two pretty good svaras. Either it's functional, being on the wall, but more importantly, there's no muktza of chesar and kiss by a mezuzah. It's very similar to the halachas regarding other kisvei hakodesh. Now, the emes is the Shmir Shabbos in Perek Chaf or Lamed Beis, talking about not mezuzah, about tefillin. He says that lamaisa people sometimes do use tefillin for a good purpose on Shabbos. I know someone told me, true story. He said it was a very short Shabbos, and there was a shir, but he's afraid he was looking for excuses not to go. But he said, "Let me go to the shir. It's kedai." He walks into the shir, gave up his sleep for this. And he walks in, the Maggid Chair is wearing tefillin. He said, I knew I shouldn't have come. Why is he wearing tefillin? So he was teaching Hilchos tefillin. And he put on the shel roish, the show, and he walked in just then. That's perfectly mutter. Because that's kli shemlach l'issur l'tzar gufay. I chesar and kiss, but fakert. First of all, there's no chesar and kiss by tefillin. And more so, there is a tzar gufay. But mezuzah, the truth is mezuzah, there's no real use to that in mezuzah. People don't use mezuzas, they don't teach Hilchos mezuzah with that because, it's too small to show. And the emes is that the truth is that mezuzah only has the parsha of mezuzah. Every siddur has that. A Megillah is very useful. It has the whole Megillah. So really, it's not used as much as tefillin or Megillah. But I'm not saying it's chesar and kiss. We can understand that it's not so useful. But since it's kisvei hakodesh, at least it's not chesar and kiss. Now, how to apply this more specifically? So basically, if the mezuzah was attached bein hashmashos, the entire Friday evening, it was knocked down after bein hashmashos, vadi laila, or anytime during Shabbos. Why should it be muktza? Migas katzvei bein hashmashos, because you couldn't use it bein hashmashos. So the emes is something very similar is in the Mishnah Berurah and the Bialach at the end of Tov Kuf Yud Ches Hilchos Yom Tov, that we find if you have peiros, fully edible peiros, food, nachtatzu, that's locked up with a lock and key and not with a real, not a lock, with a closure, and you can't open it on Shabbos unless you do malacha. So that's migas katzoy. You set it aside the entire Shabbos. So the Mishnah Berurah, Bekitz, and the Bialacha also explains that peiros, if it was opened by a guy who didn't ask, just opened it, you shouldn't be using it on Shabbos because it's katzoy. But b'shas tchak is mutter. That's what the Mishnah Berurah and Bialacha paskin regarding peiros. So it's a very good analogy to our case. Even if the mezuzah will say is katzoy because it was nailed into the wall, the doorpost. But if it fell down, laying on the floor, terrible bezoyin, shas atchak she'en kamoyu, we say it's not muktza, so pick it up and put it on the side. The truth is, we find regarding tefillin that's bezoyin, you're allowed to do certain issur d'rabanan, muktza, for sure, to prevent the bezoyin, so tefillin also. The Shevet HaLevi that we'll soon see, the Tzitz Eliezer that I mentioned, both of them discuss putting back the mezuzah when there's no malacha. They don't consider a problem of muktza. So we're pretty comfortable that a mezuzah that even if bein hashmashos is attached, would not be considered muktza, or if it is, basically the revaheta of b'makam tzayrich. Now, the mezuzah itself, since you can put it back beheta, maybe taka, it's not muktza in the first place. We thought you can't nail it, that's true, but you can slip it in, as we'll soon see. So basically the mezuzah doesn't have to be treated as muktza. The mezuzah case, however, has two chesronos. First of all, you can't learn halachas from the mezuzah case, and number two, it's not kisvei HaKodesh. But then again, the maila is that a case is not a chsar and kiss, unless you have a very expensive case. So what type of muktza would you consider the case? You want to pick up the case and pick up the mezuzah and put it back. Or you want to move the mezuzah case from the bedroom. So the truth is, it's a very unique situation. What muktza is it? It's made to hold the mezuzah. And the Ber Moshe, the Chelik Ches, Ayin Gimel, he says maybe it's a klish mlach laheta. It's a very chashuv function to protect the mezuzah. Now the truth is, most places can feel that that's inaccurate, because the case was made to attach the mezuzah to the doorpost. And typically you take out 2 nails, you knock them into the case, which is a malacha derais, as soon as you have boneh. So we have to treat a mezuzah case as a malach issur. Now, it's not your conventional malach issur. A hammer is a malach issur. A scissors is a malach issur. This is not a malach. You don't do a malacha with the case. But the analogy probably is, since it's used to do an issur, it's something like a phone book. I guess today, Zechayna Levracha, we use a phone book today. But used to have phone numbers, right? So you don't do an issur with the phone book. You don't pick up and start talking to the phone book. But you look up a number to call. But it's enough related to malacha that it's considered malach issur. So maybe the case of malach issur. Some say it's malach laheta, but probably malach issur is the right assessment. But there's no kisvei HaKodesh heta, right? But if you want to pick up the case to put the mezuzah back in so it's protected, that's sarah gufay. If you want it out of the bedroom, so that's a form of tzarech mekaymai, because otherwise you'll be denied usage of the room. So it makes sense that moving the case for no reason, taka, should not be done. You have a bunch of empty cases, but if there's a need of tzarech gufay mekaymai, you could taka move the case itself. Now, if a mezuzah case, is it shaykh to say that it's on the floor, it's a bezoyin, just the case? So the truth is, it's not a bezoyin of a case. And we want to be alam, you could say, well, if the case was made l'noi of the mezuzah, it's considered tashmishe kedusha, and you have to put it in sheimos. But to say azoivite that there's an issur bezoyin on tashmishe kedusha, it's probably more important to be makban hilchos muktza and leave it as it is, especially if it's a cheaper case. So then since there are typically 2 covers on the mezuzah, especially in rooms where couples are together, then the case is not even a tashmishe kedusha. Now, a tricky question, once I'm talking about this, I always had the shaila, if let's say the sheimos, what we call sheimos, torn piece of Gemara on the floor. Now, if you could pick up the Gemara and start learning it, so it's not muktza. But let's say a sheimos that's illegible, you can't use it. So we assume that's like shivrei kelim, that's muktza. But it's a tutvei, there's sheimos on the floor. So in Orchos Rabbeinu Aleph Kuf Mem Beis, Reb Chaim writes, he once was walking with his father, the stipler, and there was sheimos on the floor. The stipler said, pick it up and put it in the closest place. So when he got home, he told his illustrious uncle, the Chazon Ish, what happened. Chazon Ish said, no, you should have left it on the floor. So in Bas Bashtei Machlokes? So I think we can understand it. Because the Ma'isa, even if it's muktza, but it's v'zayin of I wouldn't say kisvei HaKodesh mamish, but a v'zayin of sheimos. The Chazon Ish must have held, it's not kisvei HaKodesh save third film mezuzas, so it's probably a big v'zayin to touch muktza. And Reb Shlomo Zalman's tshuva, I think, expresses this question in Ma'or Shabbos Chelik Beis Amud Tov Reish Chavav. Efsha, somebody asked this shaila, Efsha shemut b'nei kvoid HaTorah, ani lo pasakti shemuta. I never said it's muta, but maybe it's muta. And it's a whole bottom, there's a whole shtickle, the pros and cons of moving sheimos, and he's pretty noted that it's taka no heta. If it's not a bezoyin gomer of kisvei HaKodesh, so maybe muktza is more important. So I would certainly suggest if you can move it kalach hayad or tilta begufay, that's mutal chaladeis. Interesting question, which you have sometimes after a while. The mezuzah is fine, attached to the wall. You want to kiss the mezuzah, or touch the mezuzah, but the mezuzah is not so secure. When you touch it or kiss it, it moves slightly. So if we're saying when it's attached to the wall, it's considered muktza, you're moving muktza. You're not moving it off its place, but tiltal miktzah shmei tiltal. It's like the case of a person moves the table, and the rickety table and the Chanukah menorah or the Shabbos licht start to move, and Mishmur discusses it, there's a tiltal muktza. So the emes is that, I saw it again, that Seif Og Balech is a very gesunte word, on B'tof Pokuf Yud Ches, that if it's made to kiss the mezuzah, touch the mezuzah, whatever the minig is, so then that's a zayim lekach. So it's not muktza for that purpose. So you're allowed to move, touch the mezuzah, kiss the mezuzah, if it's attached to the wall, because that's not a tiltal muktza. The next question is it ever mutter to simply slip the mezuzah into the case? In other words, let's you a mazel, the case remained on the wall, somehow the mezuzah fell out. So that's clear. Let's be pashut. That's what's pashut. To knock a nail into the wall, Gemara Shabbos Kuf Gimel says, is malach of boneh. So to knock 2 nails into a mezuzah case is zicha boneh deraisa. Gemara's lashon in Kuf Lamed Aleph and Shabbos is shavim imtzayis talisay va'asa mezuzah lepischei shuchayev. So obviously attaching a mezuzah is an issur. The question is, someone may say, but I'm just reattaching the nails into the existing hole. But the issur is not making the hole, the issur is attaching the mezuzah. So attaching the mezuzah is categorically awesome. The question is, can I pick up the mezuzah? It's not muktza, we said, or whatever the cheshbon is. I want to pick up the mezuzah and slip it into the case that's fully attached to the wall. So the question is, why not? So maybe tikkun mona, because the house has no mezuzah. Like we find, it can't be mafresh sheimos amaisris, toivel akeli, hafrashas chala, but shtei tshuvas v'dava. First of all, there you can't use the truma, the food, without sheimos amaisris. But here we said that the house is no issur. And even if you go with the place, there is an issur to go into the house, but everybody else is allowed to go into the house, we said. It's only the balabas. And b'shas adchak, the balabas is going to the house. It's not awesome mamish. Also, it's only niruk masakin and Chaschinuch's famous yisoid in Lamed Beis, Ois Chav Zayin, Gotten Gimel. Even Tfilas Keli is only niruk masakin because it's not a physical tikkun. So that doesn't seem to be a problem. Lamaisa, the poskim that I mentioned earlier do seem to say that there's no issur putting back a mezuzah into the case. Makba Patish doesn't seem to be correct. It's not the finishing touches. The Seichemet that I mentioned has an interesting heta. It's a loy shchiach to put a mezuzah into the case, loy gazu rabbanon. Whatever the case is, the Tzitz Eliezer in your Gimel, Nun Gimel seems to make it as well. The pashtus is that if there's no boneh, you'll let us slip the mezuzah back into the case. Now, what's interesting, the Shevet Alevi in Dal Kuf Mem Gimel quotes a mezuzas malachim, which is sefer on kitza, but particularly on Hilchos mezuzah, Amud Lamed Beis, that has 4 reasons not to even slip a mezuzah into the case where no boneh is involved. If you're going to slip it into a case, next week you might put the case back onto the wall. So Dr. Vozna, who gives you the right to make your own gzeiros? We know Shema Yiska, a loose screw to a tight screw, but to make an issur out of a heta, because you might do it, mechates. Merzika boneh, he says, like mevata kli mehechanai. So Dr. Vozna very lam the shetayna. When you put muktza on a keli on Shabbos and vavki mechana, you can't move the entire Shabbos, it's immobile. But if you allow to slip the mezuzah in, you can take it out. So it's not even like merzika boneh. The third svar that he wants to say is tikkun mana. He says no, halacha, there's no issur on the bias, not tikkun mana. The fourth svar that he says is it's an achshevei that you're doing a very chosh v'maisa, and it's the gemar malacha. He says we don't have to respond to such tainis. The no shalacha, you can't make up your own isurim. But then he adds something very nice. The shilas yayvitz of Yankiv Emdin and Aleph Lamed Vav in the Chuvis. He says mezuzah is one mitzvah, you can't do it on Shabbos. So Dr. Vozli, so you see he's right. You can't put mezuzah on. You can't slip it in on. I can't. Why don't you slip it in on Shabbos? So you see, you can't slip it on Shabbos, Dr. Vozna, right? He says, no, it's not a raya. Because the Yavitz in that same sheet to hold, that same tshuva holds, you can't even be yoitze if you slip the mezuzah into a groove that's in the wall. The Mechaber Grada is Mekel. Mechaber says either you could attach it with nails, or if you have a little groove, a little indentation in the doorpost, slip it in. And some say it's chatchila. As long as the mezuzah is on the mezuzah beisecha. Don't put it too deep, but you could slip it into a groove. The Yaiva says no, there has to be a connection of mismarim, of nails. So Zokter Abazna, the Shita say that you have to have a connection. So of course you can't do it on Shabbos. But Lididan, that you could slip it into the grooves, so why not slip it into the case? So Rav Ozna says, I think it's fine, but someone that wants to be makel, yes, shalmi lismoich, very powerful lashon. So I was thinking, I don't know if this is Rav Ozna meant, but Rav Chaim Kanievsky in his classic work on the Hilchos mezuzah and Bialocha Reish Peivav Chav Beis, he says, based on a Chazai Nish, maybe you can't even slip the mezuzah into the case. Why? Because the Chazai Nish holds that to put up a vila and a curtain on a wall, even though everything is on, just put the curtain onto the wall, is considered boneh. He argues on a Magen Avram and Mishnah Berurah and Chumash Hadeshen. Putting something that's staying is moisav al binyan. So Reb Chaim, there's reasons, so putting a mezuzah into the case or into the groove, is at least moisav al binyan. But this is a chiddush, first of all, because most poskim do not accept the Chazon Ish's chumrah. The Ogab Alecha Tovkuf Tezayin says a very nice Lam de Shavart that when you put the curtain on the wall, it's moisav al binyan because it becomes part of the house. It's the noya bayis. The mezuzah is a kiyam mitzvah on the gavra, but not on the bayis. Doesn't become a better bayis. But lamaisa, the poskim seem to say that even to put the curtain on, most poskim are matir. Magen Avraham, Mishnah Berurah, Groisiyid. So in this, so you don't put the curtain on Shabbos, al stehelig chazon ish psak. But tell a person live a whole Shabbos without a mezuzah, be machman hilchos mezuzah. That l'chayr makes sense. Why stay without it? To call a goy? Again, you're risking not having anything. Now, the only question is, when you put the mezuzah into the groove, do you have to make another bracha? It fell off, and you want to put it in. So this we find in halacha. If you took a mezuzah to check and you put it back within 24 hours, you don't make another bracha. You took it off the paint, you don't make another bracha. But surprising enough, if the mezuzah fell off out of the case, you put it back with a new bracha. Why? So the place can compare this to Hilchos tzitzis. We find in Hilchos tzitzis, if the talis, gadol, falls off entirely, you put it back with a new bracha. If I go out for a break, I go to the bathroom, I don't make a new bracha. Why is falling off different? That's Adar. If you took it off, you had das. If it fell off, the mitzvah is gone and it's a new mitzvah. So if the talis fell off, you make another bracha. Mezuzah fell off, you make another bracha. Some poskim hold that it's not true, you don't make another bracha, but I think most poskim hold you definitely make a bracha. Now the next question, which also happens, sometimes the top nail or the top piece of tape fell off, and now the mezuzah is hanging, not kviyas, backwards, no mitzvah l'chol hadayis. Absolutely no mitzvah. You want to put back the nail during the week, Tuesday. Do you make another bracha on that? So, question is, well, you're not yoy to the mitzvah, right? So, most places say, since the mitzvah left you, you make another bracha. Rav Nissen Gariel Tzachayim Lebracha had a beautiful einfall, and he said, what's the halacha when the talis almost slipped off? You grabbed one string of the scissors and you're holding on to it for dear life. It's not on you anymore. You don't make another bracha. So why is this different? But the emes is a big makom l'chalik, because if you are holding on to at least one string, you have a shaychus to the mitzvah. Not that the mitzvah is being iskayim with one string, but you have a shaychus to the mitzvah. When the mezuzah is laying backwards, hanging, the mitzvah is gone. You're not holding on to anything. But what I think the emes is that since poskim hold, you don't make a bracha at all when the mezuzah fell. And this case, the svar like Rav Nissen to make another bracha. But the good news is that the question that we had is when the mezuzah fell on the floor, do I have to fast? So the truth is, fasting is not in Shulchan Aruch even by Sefer Torah Shenafel, Rachmana litzlan. But that's a very time-honored minig. It's a minig kadosh. Mezuzah, tefillin. Also, if a person could do it, he should fast if it fell on the floor directly. But mezuzah, there's no such minig, so basically be careful. I couldn't talk to you. That's what I believe.
Also talk about by
Same Egan should tell like you big Ashkata of Smith to today's shear. Misha after Mincha said the Sikkim. Kamani Merkashi must be spoken Zakas, so if you hear them, I mentioned them out in the office and on Sitka Yagdal Terviada.